work? Can you hear? Is that okay? Testing, 1, 2, 3. I got it about as close as I can be, right? Okay, welcome back, everybody. It's been a long time. I think we broke off somewhere in the middle of May, and then June, July, August, September, and now we're already into October. We come back. This is really my fault. As you get older, things come up, and it's has to be taken care of before you can come back. I must say it's also difficult to be here again in the Buddha Hall at Berkeley Buddhist Monastery, trying to lecture on, I guess, or open up the Avatamsaka Sutra. There's something about prolonged periods of solitude and silence that I can experience in Maine, where truly the path of words and language is cut off, except for my dog, and I'm not so sure she understands anything I say, really. And she doesn't say anything back, literally. So having that as my companion for a month or two, I really get a little nervous about coming back to talk. On the other hand, if it's just me talking, I would be very nervous about that. But what this platform is about is opening up the Avatamsaka Sutra. There's not many places in the world where this is regularly being spoken, looked at, and hopefully interpreted. And in my years of practice and cultivation, I have found nothing that surpasses it in its depth and its brilliance, profundity, and keeping me on my toes. So that's the joy part. That hopefully will take over my reluctance and carry the day. So we'll continue. On the other hand, I just got an interesting letter from somebody who heard that there were these Avatamsaka lectures, Buddhist lectures on Friday night at the Berkeley Buddhist Monastery. They're online. And so she was quite excited about this. And she and her son tuned in promptly at, 7:30 for the lecture. And they sat there diligently watching the screen, and all they saw was this old guy with a beard sitting there for 45 minutes. And right before, when their clock said 45 minutes, they turned it off, and the woman said, "Wow, that was really strange." And her son was like, "No, that was great, that was super. He just sat there not saying anything for 45 minutes. I really liked it." So I'm thinking, well, maybe I'll extend that lecture to an hour and a half, just sit here quietly for an hour and a half, and I'm going to connect with the younger generation. The older generation is kind of scratching their heads. They were expecting some words, but the kid was like, wow, that's really cool. Anyhow, that being said, we will go back to some words and language here. We are picking up again in chapter 9. My goal is to finish chapter 9 this semester. So I always say this and I try to move along faster, but then I slow things down again. But we are, on my reading, around the middle of page 47 in the text that I have. And the verse I'm looking at in English, it starts with his brilliance is pervasively clear and pure. The Chinese is Guangming Bian Qingjing. Everybody found that? Is that page 47, Locke? Maybe? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to together just slowly practice my Chinese again and read through the Chinese, and then we'll go into the English. So starting with the Guangming Bian Qingjing Chen Lei Xi Zhuan Di Bu Dong Li Er Bian Si Shi Ru Lai Zhi Rou You Jian Ru Lai善心力分别，自有一切法，用处就一致。一切世间中，处处转法轮，无心无作传，道是方便说。Okay. I will read it as is in the text here in the English, and then we'll continue to play around a little bit with the translation, but the English is something, this is brilliance, is pervasively clear and pure, and he has completely washed away the wearisome dust. Unmoving, he leaves the two extremes. This is the wisdom of a thus come one. If one sees a thus come one with body and mind, apart from discriminations, then with regard to all dharmas, one forever transcends all doubt and obstructions. Within all worlds and in all places, he turns the dharma wheel, yet is without a nature and without a turning. This is the guiding master. Thus the guiding master speaks expediently. So the first thing I have done here is in all those verses where you had the, thus come one, I've changed it to a. In other words, it's plural, not singular. And on one level, that refers to what the text clearly says, that there are thus come ones like motes of dust, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas like motes of dust. So if you've got that plurality, really it doesn't make much sense to say the Buddha or the thus come one. It makes much more sense to say a Buddha or a thus come one. The other reason I do that is when you make it plural, it includes yourself. Well, it includes people, it includes all beings. Meaning that anyone can be a thus come one, anyone can be a Buddha, and it's not just one being. That then has to do with the hermeneutic of immediacy that I found very useful in translating Buddhist texts, which is not to think that this doesn't have anything to do with you existentially or personally. In fact, quite the opposite. And when you use instead of the, it opens up that possibility for you. It opens up the imagination to think, then how many thus come ones are there? Have there been, or might there be? And you realize that as many as there are potentially living beings. So this really expands and opens up the teaching past vehicles, past even the human realm, and makes it available for everyone. The line says, brilliance is pervasively clear and pure. This brilliance we've talked about before, and of course this chapter is called Luminous Awakening or Bright, but I think brilliance here is the character Ming, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see. Yeah, Guangming. This is used to indicate a kind of penetrating clarity of mind. So it can be used as describing the unobstructed luminosity of someone who has cleared away all obstructions and sees things really as they are. And it's presented as brilliance because by contrast, mostly when we are confused, covered over, afflicted, we sort of see through a glass darkly, and it's not clear, it's not luminous, it's not bright. But there's also another meaning here, and I would say that my reading of these Buddhist texts, and I would say East Asian classics in general, this character Ming is also used to combine both an intellectual, mental perspicacity, if you will, or brilliance, but also a virtuous goodness. And it's used in the sense of bright virtue or pure virtue. Thus you have a text like the Da Shui where it says, the path of great learning, the path of complete learning, Da Shui Zhi Dao Zai, Ming Ming De, and that Ming Ming, it's this character Ming, but it's doubled, Ming Ming, really bright. So the path of great learning is to be some combination of radiating with brightness and virtue, or Mingda, bright virtue. So the moral quality, the character qualities of a good and wholesome and really exemplary person is combined with the mental intelligence, and they're seen as maybe two sides of a sword that can cut. Having the brilliance, the intellectual mental brilliance without the virtue is lopsided, and my teacher would feel was possibly dangerous, because you have brightness without moral grounding, and this brightness can go on to create all kinds of things, not all of which would be beneficial to the world of humanity without the grounding in the goodness and virtue. On the other hand, the goodness and virtue, although it's foundational and really, really important, to activate it into constructive and transformative, world-changing, has to have a certain intelligence and brilliance behind it as well. So in these texts, this was the qualities of an exemplary person was a combination of this brilliance and clarity, not just smarts, I want to be clear here, not just wit, and then the virtue, Ming Ming De, those two things. And that was then the essence of higher education or learning in this tradition, was to develop the mind and develop the nature, develop the moral, develop the intellectual. And those two together made a complete, well-rounded person. So here, when it says his brilliance pervasively clear and pure, it's referring to this combination of piercing luminosity and clarity, like a light without any shadow, at the same time, the virtue part. And in some cases, the text referred to, when this is complete, it actually shows. It's not something you imagine. You can actually see, some people say an aura, or whatever words you want to use, or without even using words, there's something that presents itself to you that has a brilliant gravitas, an awe-inspiring quality that seems to be lit up, that seems to be aglow. And the texts say, in fact, when you have this combination, it does radiate through the body, not just in the mind, and it shows in the face and even in the skin, and the texts say you can see it even looking at this person from behind. it shows in the shoulders and the arms. This is what's being talked about here. So this is a very different model of what we consider to be an educated person, but I think it's something worth thinking about returning to. Anyhow, and says, then he has completely washed away the wearisome dust. Unmoving he leaves, or I would put here, he avoids. This Chinese here is the, let's see, Li, second tone, Li R Bien. Two are, Bien is the boundaries or the extremes, the outer reaches of something. The Li can be, he leaves, but it also means to stay away from, to avoid. And I like avoid here because it's talking about aware of the two extremes, but not falling into them. So steering a course between these two extremes, and the two extremes we can talk a little bit about, but it has to do, the leaving to me sounds final. And what I see here going on is a dynamic, ongoing, considering, looking at, investigating. This brilliance or this luminosity it's being talked about is not necessarily something that's just gotten and then it's done, but it's rather something that is polished and refined and kept going day to day, week to week, even thought to thought, mood to mood, emotion to emotion. So this idea that cultivation is a maintaining rather than attaining, then I see the brilliance as the same way. And so there can be times, even with clarity and even with cultivation, that you start to slip in or feel yourself being pulled, either through your own thoughts or who you're hanging around with or something you're reading, into a either nihilistic or eternalistic mode. These are the two extremes. Like a total blank impermanence or a Pollyannish permanence kind of thing. And that point you start to leave center. And this is what the Platform Sutra, the Sixth Patriarch, talks about centering. You are in the center. You are observing the 10,000 things, but you're not swayed by them. You're observing them, you're aware of them, but you're not moved either way. This middle way, if you will, is another interpretation of the middle way. The middle way most people think about was in the Buddha's experience when he tried a kind of almost life-denying asceticism to get awakening. He was called in the patient immortal, and the image is this skin and bones cultivator, and then realized that he wasn't getting awakening through the denial of the flesh to that extreme, and accepted a offering of, they say, a kind of a milky rice thing, and then came up with the principle in cultivation of keeping the mind and the body in an even keel between a hedonistic indulgence and then a kind of life-denying asceticism, self-mortification. Another way that the middle way is rendered here is it's between these two extremes, between nihilism and eternalism, sometimes rendered as permanence or impermanence, or being and not being. Sometimes they use emptiness and existence, but what the emptiness means here, it's not the emptiness of true emptiness, which is extolled in the text, but it's the false emptiness of non-being, non-existence. And so psychologically, emotionally, and even religiously, this polarity, this duality often gets set up, and you can find yourself being pulled at different times in your life and your cultivation along these lines. And so when it says he avoids, I like that better as leave. He avoids as he's balancing, as he's centering, falling into any one of these. And then this says, this is the wisdom, the operative functioning. Wisdom is the operative brilliance, the luminosity at work. Again, to think of wisdom as something attained, it doesn't fit the spirit of these texts. Wisdom is something that is maintained. It is something that is continuously cultivated and exercised. It is discerning, it's bright, but it's also very aware. And that says, thus come one, has this kind of functioning. So maybe say a little more about, Master Hua has some commentary here that I like to share because I think it really helps. on this line, washed away the wearisome dust, he says, his commentary says, the wearisome dust refers to the burden of emotion and the drag of things. I really like that. Emotion and the drag of things. But the key, I think, here is wearisome dust is not out there. We can tend towards seeing whatever we think the external world is of sights and sounds and smells and whatnot as being pollutants, as being the wearisome dust. And they're assaulting us and assailing us. And therefore that leads you to the sense of your cultivation. I will then get rid of the wearisome dust by pulling away from the world, pulling away from things, and so forth. But in the deeper sense here, wearisome dust is not out there, but it's the accumulated garbage, so to speak, the ideas, the emotions, the identities, the fantasies, the fears, the me and mine storage locker, I like to call it. You know when you got so much stuff you can't know what to do with it, or you're going to move for a while, you rent a storage locker and then you stuff all your stuff in there because you really can't let go of it. You can't take it with you. So it's a storage locker where all these things that you thought were you and yours and whatnot over time just get put in. When you actually leave home, you give up your storage locker, which is a very interesting notion. You get your robe and your bowl, you shave your head off, and technically speaking, there's no storage locker. I think if you read the Vinaya, you could see the Buddha had a lot of admonishments to any of the monks or nuns who were building up storage lockers. So the itinerant life helps stay away from the storage locker phenomena. Not staying in under one tree for more than 3 days if you're following the Dhutanga practices, the wandering life like that. But it's really easy to find a storage locker even when you're in that mode. So it's a constant guarding against not so much the accumulation of things, but the unrecognized accumulation of identities and thoughts that form the ego. What some people, the texts refer as the self-making machine, the self-making mechanism. And the self-making mechanism reifies, this thing that isn't really found any place of a self, an absolute, unmoving, eternal, unchanging entity that is called a me. That doesn't mean there's not a person, it just means there's not that unchanging, absolute, self-existing thing. But the self-making or the ego-making mechanism, which is at the heart of samsara, which is at the heart of dukkha, we have that very strong, and it's constantly working, trying to make something out of nothing. This is really what the uncultivated life of dukkha is this constant struggle to make something out of nothing. And so that can occur with the accumulation of things, because as you accumulate things, you think that these are mine. So that's the mine part. The self has this, myself has this, and all these things make up me. But even before that is the self-identity that starts to form. It crystallizes as something, and it's really, the Yogacara school is really good on this. It's just basically fabrications. Almost like, in the Shurangama talks of almost like cataracts on the eyes. Something seems to be there, but it's really a distortion of vision. It's the same thing with this self, the atta, as it's called. This is not, again, talking about you as a person or that you exist or something like that. It's talking about psychological grasping and attaching to a kind of permanent, unchanging. And the difficulty is it's not a religious belief or disbelief. It just doesn't correspond with things as they are. It's not real. Nothing in our human experience suggests to us anything that is unchanging, permanent, self-existing. And yet, we insist upon it, at least for the self, and we try to do that. And the Buddha said that struggle, that futile struggle is like Sisyphus trying to push the rock up the hill, never gets there, it keeps rolling back down. Trying to make a self, a permanent, unchanging, eternal me and a mind, out of the nature of reality is as futile. But, see, you can see when you get to that point, then that's the eternalism. That's the, existence attachment. But you can see, you get there and say, okay, so there's nothing. Then you go to the other extreme and say there's absolutely nothing at all. There's no self, nothing belongs to self. When I die, that's it, and so on and so on and so forth. Therefore, there's no causality, and there's nobody responsible for these actions. There's no karma, there's no retribution. So this is the danger that goes with the psychology of not seeing these clearly, and with the luminosity and the brilliance breaks through. Master Hua continues, he says, a single dust mote isn't heavy, but when the dust accumulates in great amounts, it's heavy. And when it gets heavy, you'll be dragged into the hells or become a ghost or an animal, and that's what I mean by the drag of things earlier. So he wasn't just talking about the sort of drag of material possessions. He's talking about these things actually drag you into another form of existence, even while, if you don't accept his notion here of ghost, animal, or hells and say, well, I don't believe in that, it can drag you into an impoverished and incomplete human existence. So without having to go to future lives or past lives, which some people maybe have difficulty imagining or accepting, you can say, and this is what the Buddha does also in the Kalama Sutra. He says, okay, you don't believe in the past or the future? Fine. Look at the present. What really makes you happy, complete, and whole in the present? What gives you good relationships with other people, honor and respect and kindness and so forth? What works in relation to taking care of the natural world and everything? And you will find it's kusala, it's the goodness, it's the wholesome. So for no other reason, carpe diem, seize the moment now and be whole and complete. Don't worry that this may not or does carry over to other lives. So this is how he ends the Kalama Sutta. It's very, very good. And he says, if you honestly reflect, what makes my life meaningful and worthwhile? It is really having kind and wholesome relationships with people, with not abusing, with not taking advantage, with not manipulating, not lying, not killing, and so on and so forth. That feels pretty good. That's not a bad way to feel. And so you don't even have to go into the mystical or the supernatural here to take this. But Master Hua is saying here, not only does it take you to an incomplete human existence, but eventually your human existence erodes further into the lower destinies. And he says, why do we fall? Question mark. It's because the wearisome dust isn't emptied. You haven't seen through it and put it down. It's because we haven't washed it clean. But to wash it clean means, in a sense, you have to wash your own mind clean that accumulates the dust. The dust itself has no place to settle. I remember in the Platform Sutra, basically there's not one thing where it can dust alight. To the unobstructed, liberated mind, there's no place for the dust to settle. But to the mind that sets up me and wanting and craving, then you create basically, they have these things that collect dust. I don't know what they are, like static or something. And so you run it through. I saw it once, and then the dust gravitates to it because it's negative, positive charge. Anybody know what I'm talking about? No, we know what I'm talking about. It's like an electric vacuum cleaner. It has a negative thing, and when you run it over, the particles get... Anyhow, that's the way the attached mind works. So what isn't originally dust, sight, sound, smells, taste, object, and touch, they're just things and the flow of things. But the mind that grasps and wants turns them into dust because it starts to imagine it's accumulating them. It doesn't actually accumulate them because you can't. So all that whole storage locker of the things that have gotten, in the end, can't go, can't stay, won't. And so you spend all this time accumulating things that you can't keep. And in a sense, both while you're getting them and after you get them, don't fulfill, don't satisfy. Our whole life is sort of frantically wanting and craving and acquiring things that don't give us any pleasure or meaning. It's like, and yet, we keep doing it. Then it says it's because we have, so what should be done, asked Master Hua? The very best is to put up a piece of glass to keep the dust out. It's a wonderful metaphor. What does the glass represent? It represents prajna wisdom. So in a sense, he's giving a metaphor of saying, between the dust and you, put up this glass so the dust is not welcomed, is not brought in. And that I think what he means by the glass is this clarity, a luminosity to see things really clearly. So you can play with the metaphor, but I'm just reading his commentary. But what he's suggesting here, I think, is really important. Was a teaching I got early on, and I mentioned this before, when I said the dust, the afflictions, the wearisome stuff that was part of my life. And when I came to the monastery, I could feel it very intensely. Something about the monastery is like that clear glass. It's very interesting. I hadn't thought about the metaphor. When I first came in the monastery, all of a sudden I was like in a glass bubble, and I could see everything outside that, and it couldn't get in. And all of a sudden I could see dust as dust. So I made the statement to the teacher that the dust, the fatigue, all these afflictions are really all over me. You know, I can't get rid of them. They won't leave me alone. And he just smiled and he said, they aren't real. But whatever you can't see through and put down, that's the dust. As soon as you see through them, they have no place to settle. It's because you invite them with your craving and your wanting and your fears. If you see through them and let them go, they're just things. This is really interesting because what it's doing is saying the problem is not out there, nor is the solution out there, but it's in the mind. It's in the mind that moves and attaches. And then he says, all doubts and obstructions, the last line of that text. Oh, that moves on to the next line of text, where all doubts and obstructions. I'm looking, is that it? One forever transcends all doubt and obstruction. So I'm moving the text forward and saying, if it is seen through and put down in this way, then all doubts and obstructions also vanish. They aren't out there. This is really, it's both sobering and humbling, I think, at the same time when you have that realization. And this could refer to relationships, to anything that obstructs or seems to impede. Initially, my response has always been, it's something out there that I need to get rid of, distance myself, reject, even in a more almost violent way, eradicate, this kind of thing. But this kind of text, I think, not so much spiritually, of course, but in a very immediate psychological way says, just stop. The problems aren't there. The problems are your interpretation, projection, and attachment to them. When that changes, they literally look different. They don't look the same. An object of desire or temptation is only made from the mind that desires and wants. When the mind that desires and wants stop, there is no object of desire and temptation. Things are just things. People are just people. And when that process starts, it's both very liberating in the sense that it gives you power then to be free of these things, but it's also confers a certain amount of responsibility, accountability. And it's easier to blame or to look outside than it is to see it this way. Anyhow, let me go on. Master Wa talks about the two extremes, and I already mentioned that, but he says the extremes of, he uses being, not being, sometimes called existence, non-existence. Sometimes it's also rendered as nihilism and eternalism, or permanence and annihilationism. And he defines, as his commentary says, there's a number of ways to explain it. Those who believe, for example, that when someone dies, it's just like turning off a light, is a form of annihilationism. There's nothing left. And those who also conversely believe that nothing ever changes, there's some permanent, unchanging, immutable soul or something that goes on forever, ever. That's also the other of eternalism. The text, he says I'm moving. He leaves the two extremes. this is a really important line. Master Wa's commentary says the Buddha doesn't move and is apart from or avoids the two extremes of existence or non-existence. This is the wisdom of the thus come on, the state of a Buddha's wisdom. This unmoving is really the important part of this passage. I want to stress. It's, I think, is it Budong? What's the Chinese? Budong. What's the tone? Sorry. Budong. So this came up so much in my life of cultivation under my teacher. The presumption is that we have everything we need whole and complete. And if we just attend to this in the here and now, everything will be okay and there'll be no problems. It's when we wrongly presume that we don't have everything whole and complete and lack that we start to seek and search. And the seeking and searching then reaches out. And the reaching out then is this movement towards these objects that we fantasize or want. And so when the expression is ru ru budung, thus, unmoving, refers to staying in the center where everything is okay. So the centering is but it's not an unmoving, it is a nimble, adaptive, responsive center. This is what the Platform Sutra means basically by everywhere engaged but nowhere attached, not grasping attached. So you're in a center and you're responsive and you're aware, you're discerning. The movement is when you leave the center either to reject or to grasp, and then you've moved. So things would come up, we'd be practicing for a while and then suddenly some favorite food you haven't had for a long time and finally figured out was really kind of your downfall. And then the food would be offered and the master would look at you and say, dong budong, did you move or not move? Not meaning did you notice or not notice, of course you noticed, but did a desire arise or a rejection impulse arise? Either way you moved off center because you didn't see it as just another phenomena. So whatever it was, an old girlfriend would come to the monastery to visit. And then the master would say, so, dong budong. Or he might ask the girlfriend, dong budong. Which one? It didn't matter. Whatever you couldn't see through and put down was the thing that moved you off center. And so therefore, in your cultivation, you became aware when you moved. And it has both an intellectual and a visceral quickness to it. You can feel it through your body when this off-centering occurs, when this movement occurs. So this line here, unmoving, he leaves or avoids the two extremes. It means you're staying centered, but it doesn't mean you're wooden or dead. It's just not getting swept away. So you're aware, you're alert, but you're not moved off center. That's the everywhere engaged, nowhere attached. Also, in the Avatamsaka, it's called going and returning, no border, movement and stillness, one source. No border, one source. No extremes, and one same thing, the same thing, movement and stillness. This sounds rather abstract, but it's not. It means in the midst of life, you are engaged and active, but you're not moved off center. You have a stillness, a centeredness about you. And even in the stillness, there's still an awareness and an alertness going on. So this has a psychophysical dimension in meditation. When Chan is done properly, the body is still, but the energy is moving and it's nowhere attaching. Contrary, when you stand up, you are moving, but the mind is still. So this non-duality to movement and stillness is the goal. And so that's why it says, to someone who's cultivating this, all places are the same. And even all time is the same. Because you are in that thusness spot of not moving, and yet you're totally engaged. this text says, from the Platform Sutra, it's really wonderful. He says, things naturally come and go, but the essence of the mind is unimpeded. That is prajna. Let's go back to this prajna as this centering. Things naturally come and go, but you don't come and go with them. The essence of the mind is unimpeded. And then he says, in every place and in every moment, in thought after thought, never becoming muddled. This is how the Sixth Patriarch describes the unmoving. Okay, there's more that I could go into. I tried for 3 tonight. I got to 2, and I really didn't even finish the 2. So be it. Mea culpa. I'll stop here, and we'll pick up again next week. Jinchuan or Jinwei, are one of you gonna? Dong budong. There's some negotiating going on who's going to talk. The one who doesn't want to talk says to the other, I'll be a bodhisattva and give you the opportunity. Oh, sorry. Can I transfer this over? Here. It's on.
Just hello. Can you hear me well? Okay, very good. Okay, I was not sure, like waiting for the signal. So we just shortly mention about the phenomena of the monastery to stay and move and be in the different situations when we are quite challenged. And Marty says, stay and move. Mostly, in my case, I observe when I'm moved by very many different situations. The one wonderful place is lunch coming. Oh, I have this, or why is not that, you know, and a lot of emotions and feelings can arise from it. But what I want to say, the very short story, how small things can move us when we are here, cultivate together. I think a year ago we have a group of people who stay in the retreat. And in the monastery, because our routine is quite repetible, very constant, right? We wake up in the morning, we meditate, we chant. So very small things can be very big things. So once we have a big cleaning here in the monastery, speaking about the taking out the dust and making a space. And I think Chile was collecting a lot of electronic wastes, you know, and we have a big stack of old printers.
Oh, I remember that.
I remember this period, you know, pyramids of.
Where did that all come from?
I don't know. It's talking about the storage, logging storage. And there's a lot of them, so finally we find a way, we want to actually get rid of them or let go of them. And so it was, someone make a search, so here is the place when can be accepted the electronic wastes. And okay, so the car was packed, our minivan, and I think, I don't know who asked the other guys, so who want to go to, to electronic waste? It's like, I'm going, like all of guys want to really go. You know, this is the most exciting trip, to move electronic wastes, you know, to, I don't know, a 10 minutes drive from here to, I don't know what was the street, Shatak Avenue from here. It's very close by. So it's amazing to see how our mind is quick and move. And like Marty says, I think this is very true. This is like glass, like a magnified glass. We really see the moments when moment by moment we're grasping something or rejecting, and very often we don't see that. So probably first place when we are here, we are more and more in touch how often our minds is uncentered, not very focused, and dictated by all these desires or aversions. And definitely is the process. Sometimes also it's nice that the smallest, the most boring thing can be very exciting.
But it serves, the glass, and you were talking, is really, it's a magnifying glass.
Yeah.
So you're in the monastery, you've left behind all the big things, but now it's just a trip to the recycling center.
Exactly.
But it's the same mind.
Same
so
mind.
that it magnifies the mind. You can really see it in the little things. You go, oh my gosh, if that's where I'm at, that's where the mind goes. It's really good.
Okay, so this is it for today. So very happy that we have again on our Friday lectures with Marty. And all the classes right now is on in the semester. So everything is online so far in terms of classes. I think on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday we have Stephen Turner class at 7:30 is the Zoom link you can find on our website. Thursday is the Insight Meditation communities that's related with Spirit Rock, James Barras teaching, also online. Friday is Marty return. So next week we'll have another class. Saturday, Monk Heng Sure offer lecture about the Avatamsaka Sutra as well. And this is actually, we are partially open. If someone wants to come to the monastery meditate, is an opportunity twice a week on Thursdays and Fridays in the morning, 6:15, and afternoon, 5:15 p.m.
Any requirements when they come in?
Yes, people has to be masked and do need vaccination, how it works right now.
And we don't provide vaccination.
We don't provide vaccination, unfortunately.
We can vaccinate against other things, but not the...
But mainly you have to register. You can send, you can find the link on the website. And definitely mask is needed, and yeah, please come and sit. We sit with masks on for 1 hour. This is it.
Okay. We'll do the transference.
May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of painters into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bows. Bowing respect to the triple jewels.